My name is Marcus, and I'm here on behalf of Fracture Sounds to show you their latest blueprint instrument, Gentle Strings. And if you happen to be new here, Blueprint is a series of sample instruments compatible with the Kontakt 7 player that are curated from Fracture Sounds' experiments and passion projects. The third instrument in this series was called Gentle Winds, and that featured a small woodwind ensemble, and now here we are on instrument number 7, which features a chamber-sized string ensemble. I'm going to walk you through the features of this instrument very quickly, and then I'm going to show you a piece of music that I've made, or rather remade, which shows how it sounds in context. And finally, if you'll indulge my opinion, just briefly, I'll talk about why this library has some key strengths for me personally. Let's begin. Quick run through of the controls. First one is Dynamics, which is controlled by CC1 or your mod wheel, and as the name implies, colour, brightness and darkness. If I turn the dynamics back down, that'll give us a really soft sound. Fracture Sounds' atmosphere layers. Let me solo them out for you with this handy solo button that I am still 95% convinced that I inspired them to install. On the right here we have our reverb, which for context I'm going to turn the atmosphere all the way down and the reverb all the way down so that you can hear how these strings sound dry. And here's how it sounds with the reverb all the way up. And if I click on the cogwheels on the right, I can change the type of reverb and adjust some of the parameters. So we have these options. Shimmer, I'll turn the size right up. I got a bit more than I bargained for there. Let me just put that back on haul where it belongs and turn this back down to a more default position. And finally our mic mix, and for context these strings were recorded in the nave, which is quite a lovely acoustic space. It's big enough that you get a decent amount of reverb, but it's quite controlled, quite warm sounding. But Fracture Sounds have got a really good close mic setting, and it really just shows how dry these strings can sound. Let me turn the reverb back down as well, just to really demonstrate. And I'll just move the perspective to the far mic so you can hear how that sounds too. Last but not least, if I click on these cogs on the left, that takes us into our setup page where we have options not just to control the tightness and dynamic range, but also attack and release. And if I just turn this all the way up, here's the difference that makes. All the way down. It makes it less of a standard string sound and more kind of like an effect. The difference that tightness makes is quite subtle, but basically what it does is cut into the sample a little bit at the beginning, which means the string sound comes in quicker and makes playing it a little bit easier. I'll turn it all the way down again. You probably wouldn't be able to hear any difference, but if you're playing it, you'll probably notice it. And finally, dynamic range increases or decreases the volume of loud and soft samples. So if I turn it all the way up and use the mod wheel rather than velocity in this library, if I turn it all the way down, And there we go, there are our controls. It's now time for me to show you the piece of music that I've made. And I guess to explain my thought process here, I actually need to talk about why I really like this particular blueprint. So if you've heard textural violin already, you obviously know that that has a sound to it, and this has got quite a different sound to it. This is very Thomas Newman-esque, very warm and lush. And I just have to say that playing around with it over the past few days, I've really enjoyed just playing and singing. For me, the strength of this library is probably going to be more in people that want a less CPU heavy string section for maybe a pop piece or something for sketching, as well as all the traditional TV scoring that we associate Fracture Sounds with. And I found that when I was trying to come up with a demo track for this library, I just kept playing and singing a track that I'd already written called These Shores, which I released like 4 years ago. And after a while, I decided that rather than trying to fight it, I would just do a little remake of These Shores using both this library and a few other Blueprint libraries as well. There is a little bit of cheating going on, so I did use vocals, which I apologise in advance for, and I also used James Everingham's Woodchester piano. So those are the two libraries. Library? Is my voice really a library? These are the two instruments in this piece that aren't Blueprint, but other than that, this project was all done using Blueprint instruments. So I hope you'll enjoy and indulge me for doing something a little bit different this week. This is the Fracture Sounds remake of These Shores.
Breathing in the air for the hell of it, holding on to flying shapes that don't fit. I know the space in my head, I've seen it in your face. How could you have lost me when I've been here all these years? Count the planes leaving scars across the sky and say it will be okay, it will be okay.
So yeah, honestly, I had such a good time writing this, and the size of the ensemble means that unlike other ensemble patches, it doesn't get too kind of thick and mushy. I also think the crossover between each instrument is perfect as well, like it feels natural. So just going through quickly the stuff that isn't Fracture Sounds, here are my vocals. I only used 1 or 2 plugins, you know, didn't need much work at all.
Breathing in the air for the hell of it.
That'll do. Next we have the Woodchester piano from Fracture Sounds' signature collection. Damn it, Fracture Sounds, that sounds so nice. Everything else in this library is a Blueprint instrument, so let me show you how I've used gentle strings first of all. More out of habit than anything else, I always solo the atmosphere layer onto its own track if I want to use it, just because it means that I can really hear exactly what's going on and mix it accordingly. Here's what this one is doing. It responds really well to the dynamics control as well, but the mic mix, not really so important. That's the atmos layer, and now we have the dry string chords, which in terms of string composition is not the most imaginative writing you've ever seen, but these sound really good. So a couple of techniques, because we don't have any legato in this library, but to be honest, I don't think if you've got this in a track, it's actually that noticeable. Just by overlapping these notes a little bit, I think it sounds perfectly acceptable. There's my dynamics controls. I loved how nice and bright it sounds when it's both close mic'd and the colour is turned up. I don't know how to describe it. It just reminds me of the soundtrack from Finding Nemo, and I really like that soundtrack. Turned up the tightness, and the attack, as you can see, is quite sharp, so that these transitions between notes aren't too noticeable. You don't want that kind of like ducking sound as one note ends and the next begins. And I think honestly it's worked pretty effectively. Like in context with the rest of the instruments, if I was just to hear that, I personally would be fooled into thinking that I was hearing a legato library. Just saying. Our third and final gentle strings track is a more shimmery type sound, which basically I have done a little bit of manipulation to using some of Logic's plugins. I put on this pitch shifter because at this point in the track I wanted this pitch bend effect. And to try and make this sound as natural as possible, I drenched this track in a bunch of reverb in Logic using Valhalla. So that's how I managed to hide the artifacts that come from using Apple's inbuilt pitch plugin. Fracture Sound's textural violin Col Legno patch. That's such a winner of a sound. And then on this second track, the free tremolo, which as you can see, more or less has the same settings, and that's just to lend a bit of texture to these outro chords. Finally, the OG, Blueprint number 1, Fracture Sound's electric keys. 3 instances in this project. I didn't just do the bass thing. You know, I know, shock horror, right? Here it is, first of all, with the amp turned on and key releases turned down for creating this ostinato type sound. A little bit of EQ here, again, just for mixing with the vocals a little bit better. And yes, the second instance is the Fracture Sounds electric keys bass, which is pitch shifted 36 semitones down, and key press, key release turned all the way down because they just sound very odd when you pitch shift them so far, and then the tightness turned all the way up. And then finally, our last instance of electric keys are these nice little chords, which towards the middle of the piece take over from the strings for a brief interlude, just for a change in texture basically. And you can see here we're on the direct signal rather than the amp. So there we go. There is Fracture Sound's gentle strings in context. And to reiterate what I was saying earlier, this instrument really seems to inspire the more pop artist side of my writing. And I know that's a really broad generalization to say something is either film and TV music or it's pop music. But I definitely think that the strength of this library, for me as a composer, is when I write pieces of music like this, which are more vocal oriented or have another instrument that's more of the soloist, and you want to put in strings, but you don't necessarily feel the need to fiddle around for ages with 4 legato tracks and doing all the mixing that's involved with that. This is something that, out of the box, sounds absolutely stunning, and for that reason alone, I would say that it is worth adding to your collection of instruments, which you can do for free by signing up to the Fracture Sounds newsletter. Consider subscribing to this YouTube channel so you don't miss any more beautiful free sample instruments, and I will see you when I see you. Goodbye.